Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. The leftist cope over the last few days from the mainstream media after the historic Trump victory has been actually overwhelming and so much worse than I even would have imagined. These people are licking their wounds, going into damage control and trying to blame absolutely anybody but themselves. They are avoiding accountability like the plague and not realizing or not admitting even one tiny bit that they are a part of the problem. So we're going to cover a broad spectrum of this cope today. And let's start off with MSNBC.
The Washington Post, Matt Bai, writes in part, I do think the prosecutions fed a narrative of Trump as a victim. I also think Democrats dug themselves into a hole on cultural issues and identity politics. Trump's vicious transgender ad in the closing weeks, she's for they, them, he's for you, was probably the most effective of the cycle. I think that probably landed with a lot of traditionally Democratic voters who feel like the party is consumed with the cultural issues, while the economic issues don't really change. I think people needed a reason to feel good and hopeful about voting for her, and absent that, a lot of frustrated voters apparently decided to go with the guy who wants to burn it all down.
Let's dig a little deeper, because you have that stacked on top of what happened on college campuses this fall, stacked on top of what's been happening on college campuses over the past 4 or 5 years. I have said this on the air, and every time I've said it, people said, oh, you're just saying that because you're a white conservative. No, I'm just saying it because every Democrat that we have ever sat down with dinner with over the past 5 years who have kids that go to colleges say their kids are afraid to speak in class because they'll be canceled. Let me say that again. And they're all Democrats. Everybody that we've had dinner with, if they have a kid in college, you go, how are the Red Sox going? Yeah, fine. Yeah. Sitting there eating. Beautiful day today, wasn't it? Yeah. You know, my daughter at University of Virginia, she's afraid to raise her hand in class because if she says something that's politically incorrect, she will immediately be canceled. She'll be shunned from class. She'll be destroyed in social media by noon. So they just sit in class quiet. Now, if any of you, which camera? Give me a camera to look at. Boom! Oh, look at that one. If any of you out there say, oh, that's just like a conservative, white, Southern guy, da-da-da, that's what you're losing. That's what you're losing. Because that's what I heard. And I didn't hear it from Republicans. I didn't hear it from Trumpers. I heard it from Democrats over the past 3 or 4 years. Their kids were afraid to talk in class and say something unpopular because they would be canceled. And it's an epidemic. Willie will tell you it happens in New York City schools. It happens in colleges. And all of this adds up to people going, come on, this is crazy. And Mike, it's having an impact from, again, the trans ad to, the athletics. And by the way, as we've said on the show 1,000 times, Democrats should be smarter on the women's athletics thing. 85% of Americans oppose men transitioning after puberty and competing against women. And I'm not just saying this the day after the election. I've been saying this for years. This is not a hard call. You can show compassion. And you can show grace. And as the Republican governor of Utah said, let's figure out a way to do this. But one way we don't do this is by allowing men who transition after puberty competing against young girls who have been working their entire lives to be as good as they can be. And then they get destroyed in the pool, on the track, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So this is very funny to see, guys, because after the election blowout, these people must be registering that the American people are completely rejecting the leftist Democratic establishment messaging, and that includes them. So now they're trying to act like they're also upset by grabbing some of the lowest possible hanging fruit. It's cancel culture. We don't want to see these people on college campuses being canceled, and we don't want to see men competing in women's sports. You see, they're doing two things at the moment. They're trying to not drown, and they're also just trying their hardest to avoid admitting that they are a part of the problem. Just in regards to these sort of gender issues, I mean, where have you been on the things that people actually, regular, normal, common sense people actually care about, like the transitioning of children and the indoctrination of children and the gross pride parades where these gay men are naked in the middle of the street peeing on each other in San Francisco. I mean, call us bigots, but people actually don't want their families exposed to these sorts of things. And when you're trying to win over a populace, whether it be win the viewership or the votes of them, then you should probably tap into that and realize that people reject these narratives. I mean, check out this clip from just before the election that took me about 5 seconds to find.
Human behavior recently showed that in states where anti-trans laws are passed, we see an increase in suicide attempts up to 72%. So that's why I pleaded to trans youth on the floor, stay alive.
The election is obviously 16 days away. How harmful would a Trump presidency be for the transgender community, especially in Montana and states with a similar political makeup? What is the threat that a second Trump presidency poses to the trans community?
You know, we don't have to look farther than the Trump campaign's closing arguments here in the 2024 elections, where we have seen tens of millions of dollars in ads targeting our communities. And we have seen them make this case. So we talk about the harm it will do to the trans community. We would see national bans. We would see additional targets on our access to healthcare and our ability to exist in public life.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, people want to be able to afford groceries and they want to have some semblance of hope that the American dream is still alive and well. And they're not too worried about trans issues and how Donald Trump's presidency will mean that men can't go in women's bathrooms and men can't play in women's sport. It's just not really top of the agenda. In fact, they outright will just reject this. And so this cope is just funny to watch. And now let's go over to CNN and we'll have a listen to Scott Jennings, who's the only sane one on CNN, to be honest. And we'll have a look at a few more clips as well.
I'm interpreting the results tonight as the revenge of just the regular old working class American, the anonymous American who has been crushed, insulted, condescended to. They're not garbage. They're not Nazis. They're just regular people who get up and go to work every day and are trying to make a better life for their kids, and they feel like they have been told to just shut up when they have complained about the things that are hurting them in their own lives. I also feel like this election, as we sit here and pour over this tonight, is something of an indictment of the political information complex. I mean, we've been sitting around here for the last couple of weeks, and the story that was portrayed was not true. I mean, we were told Puerto Rico was going to change the election. Liz Cheney, Nikki Haley voters, women lying to their husbands. Before that, it was Tim Walz and the camo hats. Night after night after night, we were told all these things and gimmicks were going to somehow push Harris over the line, and we were just ignoring the fundamentals. Inflation, people feeling like that they were barely able to tread water at best. That was the fundamentals of the election. And so I think that both parties should always look at the results of an election and figure out what went right and what went wrong. But I think for all of us who cover elections and talk about elections and do this on a day-to-day basis, we have to figure out how to understand, talk to, and listen to the half of the country that rose up tonight and said, we've had enough.
Guys, don't forget to like the video if you haven't already and subscribe to the channel, but also just another little announcement for you here. You may have noticed that I haven't changed clothes in 4 days. If you watched my live stream and my last few videos, you'll see that I have had the same kit on. And that's because this Many Men shirt, Many Men Wish Death Upon Me, little 50 Cent and Donald Trump collage there, is one of the most base shirts that you can buy on the whole planet Earth at the moment. So if you guys would like to see that, plus my whole entire catalog of based merch, hit that link below the Reality Based store and you guys can shop our entire catalog today. And it is a great way to support the channel. Let's get back to the video.
Something that's been on my mind for several months, there was an article in the New York Times in June that said resistance to new Trump administration already forming. And it was this long article about all these groups that were already out there. At that time, they thought he was going to beat Biden, but already planning to try to tie up the administration in court. You've had Jamie Raskin out there already saying, you know, we got to try to tie him up, maybe even before he's sworn in. Today, Sheldon Whitehouse and the Senate put out a press release saying we're going to focus not on progress, but on containing Donald Trump. My political advice to all these people is, please pick up the election results today and see what happened. The American people want this president and his administration and his party to make progress on the things they promised to do. This is exactly what happened last time. They were plotting to impeach him before he ever took office back in 2016. Let us not have a replay of this. Can we just have a couple of years of peace for the Republicans and President Trump to do what they promised to do, because the American people clearly are asking for it. There's a difference in responding to your constituents and working overtime to try to prevent the duly elected government from doing anything. This thing back in
Obama nominate a Supreme Court justice. It is so duplicitous, I feel like. I respect you, Scott, and you're my friend, but like, please do not sit here and say that Republicans, when Democrats are elected, just roll over and let you all are struggling.
My advice is, if you all go down this road and try to stop this government, which just won a mandate, from doing anything, you will again pay the price in election after election. The American people are asking for progress. Do not tie this man up. Give this person a chance to lead.
I'm going to speak some hard truths to my friends in the Democratic Party. This is not Joe Biden's fault. It's not Kamala Harris's fault. It's not Barack Obama's fault. It is the fault of the Democratic Party in not knowing how to communicate effectively to voters. We are not the party of common sense, which is what the message that voters sent to us. For a number of reasons. We don't know how to speak to voters. When we address Latino, and language has meaning. When we address Latino voters as Latinx, for instance, because that's the politically correct thing to do, it makes them think that we don't even live on the same planet as they do.
Oh my God, I will vote for Donald Trump.
When we are too afraid to say that, hey, college kids, if you're trashing a campus at Columbia University because you're unhappy about some sort of policy and you're taking over a university and you're trashing it and preventing other students from learning, that is unacceptable. But we're so worried about alienating one or another cohort in our coalition that we don't know what to say when normal people look at that and say, wait a second, I send my kids to college so they can learn, not so that they can burn buildings and trash lawns, right? And so on and so forth. When we put pronouns after names and say she, her, as opposed to saying, you know what, if I call you by the wrong pronoun, call me out, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. But stop with the virtue signaling and just speak to people like they're normal. There's nothing I'm going to say to Shermichael that I'm not going to say to you, that I'm not going to say to somebody else. I speak the same language to everybody. But that's not what Democrats do. We constantly try to parse out different ways of speaking to different cohorts because our focus groups or our polling shows that so-and-so appeals to such and such. That's not how normal people think. It's not common sense. And we need to start being the party of common sense again. Joe Biden is not responsible for that. Neither is Kamala Harris. It is a problem that Democrats have had for years. I've been banging the drum on this for, I don't know how, probably 10 years, if not longer on this. We need to get back to being the party of common sense, that people look at us and say, we understand you. We appreciate what you say because you speak our language. And until we do that, we should stop blaming other people for our own mistakes.
So once again, very funny. But I mean, what are CNN going to do now? What is their messaging going to be? I'd imagine probably the same as the last 8 years, I'd say. I mean, they only really have one path. They are only in business because Donald Trump is still in the headlines. And it's never lost on me the irony of the fact that they are only in business because of the person that they just constantly shit on. But what they will have to do, because they really don't have another option, because trust in them is essentially dead, is just hold on to the last remaining Trump derangement syndrome people. And there are still a few of them. They've got 4 more years in the gas tank. But beyond that, they've really got nothing good to say whatsoever. I mean, these people were the purveyors of the Russia collusion hoax, of all of the PC, woke, cultural Marxist talking points. They championed senile Joe Biden and said that he was as sharp as a tack and that Kamala Harris was such a wonderful, inspirational candidate. And she ran a flawless campaign while Donald Trump is a rambling fascist. I mean, they have called Trump every single name in the book and they've tried to smear him 7 ways to Sunday. But now that the American people have spoken, they must know deep down, or they must just blatantly, outwardly know that the gig is up and they're looking for someone to blame that's not them. And just one of the examples of recent scummy journalism that they have done is when they were trying to defame JD Vance by getting his old transgender friend on in an attempt to do some sort of a hit piece on Vance and make people not like him. Check this out.
And that's why I want to ask you in the context of how well you knew JD Vance. You had shared a message that he sent with us, that he sent to you in 2016. And he apologized for describing you in his book, Hillbilly Elegy, as an extremely progressive lesbian. That was the quote in the book. So in this message that you shared, he writes to you, he calls you Sophs, his nickname, and he says, I recognize now that this may not accurately reflect how you think of yourself, and for that, I'm really sorry. I hope you recognize that the description came from a place of ignorance when I first started writing years ago. I hope you're not offended, but if you are, I'm sorry. Love you, JD. That obviously is a very different person in terms of these issues and perspectives than we all hear now. I wonder, Sophia, when you look at it now and you're getting ready to watch him tomorrow night, who do you think the real JD Vance is?
Yeah, could the real JD Vance please stand up? I don't think anybody knows, right? We've had many different iterations of JD Vance. He's a chameleon, he's a fraud, and he's out for power and wealth. And I think that shows that's why he's wildly unpopular, because the American people value authenticity. And this is, I think, actually ties into the trans rights issue, Aaron, because what I'm seeking and what all trans people are seeking is the right to live their authentic lives, to be their authentic selves. And that makes you happier and it makes you less angry. And I think, you know, it might be easier for JD Vance to order donuts without looking weird if he could be his authentic self. And he might have a thing or two to learn from trans people, is all I'm saying.
I don't know about you guys, but when I watch that, I think to myself, JD Vance seems like a respectable guy. He seems kind and loving to his friends, but also principled. He'll stand on what he believes and he won't take a backward step while still treating people with kindness. But it makes the they-them seem like a nasty piece of work. So, I mean, well done, JD Vance, on trimming the fat from the next guest list next time you have a party. I mean, I'm sure Vance will have some much better value friends to invite this time because, I mean, that guy looks like about as much fun as a fart in a spacesuit.
Oh, my God. No, 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 no. Hey, 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 hey. Don't do that. No, no, come on. Hey. Oh, man. Oh.
But anyways, some of these people are actually too dumb to realize the way that the winds are blowing and can't understand that to come back to normality a little bit would actually be a very effective grift for them. We've seen Chris Cuomo do this a little bit recently. But no, these guys aren't going to do that. They're going to double down.
Let's be honest, it was a terrible night last night. It was a terrible night for women, for children, for the hundreds of thousands of hardworking immigrants who make this country go, for healthcare, for our climate, for science, for journalism, for justice, for free speech. It was a terrible night for poor people, for the middle class, for seniors who rely on Social Security, for our allies in Ukraine, for NATO, for the truth and democracy and decency. And it was a terrible night for everyone who voted against him. And guess what? It was a bad night for everyone who voted for him, too. You just don't realize it yet.
How absolutely pathetic is that? You'll see. We've been wrong for the last decade, but you'll see. We'll be right this time. I mean, I don't actually think he's crying there. I think that they're sort of performative tears. I think they're crocodile tears, and he doesn't care about anybody but himself. I mean, he'll finish that show up, get his assistant to wipe the sort of tears and the mascara out of his eyes. He'll get into his limousine, go back to his mountain, and then watch from above. Just watch the peasants down below. He doesn't care about the people that he claims to care about. But, I mean, if he actually is legitimately crying there out of emotion, then he is a massive pussy. So anyways, on to AOC now, the only ever waitress in history to bring absolutely nothing to the table, who is obviously equivalent to a brainwashed 19-year-old college student having sushi in the cafeteria with her furry friends talking about capitalism and how to overthrow the patriarchy. Let's have a listen to AOC talking about how the fascist regime is incoming.
We are about to enter a political period that will have consequences for the rest of our lives. We cannot give up. We now find ourselves in a time in history that has precedent, and we find ourselves, I believe, in a time where there are, let's say, peers in history of mass movements of people that mobilize to protect one another in times of fascism and authoritarianism. And this is the era that we are poised to enter. Donald Trump has talked about turning the military on U.S. citizens that he deems his domestic political enemies. Authoritarians and people that he affiliates closely with and strongmen abroad in regimes like that, it is not uncommon to jail political dissidents or legislative opponents. This is the world that we very realistically may be entering.
So just our favorite there, guys. AOC once again doubling down on the fascist line. I mean, he had 4 years in office and he had a pandemic during that time where he could have shut down the whole country and seized power for himself, but he decided not to do it. But this time he is going to do it. You'll see, as Jimmy Kimmel says, and as AOC says, you guys will regret voting for the orange fascist.
You just don't realize it yet.
So anyways, guys, do not forget to check out the Many Men shirt, plus much more on the Most Based merch store in the whole entire world, bar none. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also, if you would like to watch another video, you can do so right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.